maybe not. In both the New Testament and the Old Testament, there are quite a few usages of the word bit or bridle. And we use, along with the Bible in the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints, we use the Book of Mormon. And the Book of Mormon also uses the bridle, and it says in one of its scriptures, use boldness but not overbearance, and also see that ye bridle all your passions, that ye may be filled with love. See that ye refrain from idleness. Bridle all your passions. You would think that just hearing that in sermons and lessons I would learn, but God has to teach me differently. I must have a thicker head. So I grew up in a fairy tale place. Our home was nestled at the base of Pikes Peak in Colorado. We lived on acres of beautiful land. I had barns full of horses. I didn't know it was perfect, not until later. But I was very blessed. We also had thousands and thousands of acres around us of national forest that we could hike and ride and explore. I was very fortunate that way. I had a horse. Her name was Buffy. I had her since she was a filly. So I raised her from the ground up. And she was mine. I taught her how to jump, how to barrel race, how to rope. We did it all. When we would bring the horses in at night, we would go put a halter on them. Now, a halter is a very simple device. It goes across the nose and head, and there's a lead rope. It's meant for leading the horse off the ground. It's meant for tying a horse. It was not developed to ride a horse with. There's no bit. There's nothing here in the mouth with a halter. But the pasture was a long way from the barn. And I would swing up on her back with the halter rope, with the lead rope, and ride her to the barn. And I eventually started riding her into the woods with the halter, just because we were able to do it, and she was a good horse. And I was put on a horse before I was able to walk. I had a lot of confidence in my skill. I was carefree, I was courageous, and I was confident when it came to horses. What went wrong was when my confidence overrode common sense. When I was about 15 years old, I had my horse with the halter and lead rope going out into the woods for a ride when a couple of my friends drove in, Corey and Todd, and I suggested that they hop on and go for a ride with me. So I helped them onto the back of my horse and we went out into the forest. And it was a pleasant ride, much like today. It was a beautiful fall day, warm, and we had a very relaxing ride. And we went about 1.5 miles, and I turned around to come home. And on the way home, we go through this meadow, just this beautiful meadow. One of the rules that you learn quite early when you're raised with horses is you don't run those horses home, right? You never run your horse home because you don't want a barn sour horse. You know that from your experiences with your trail rides. A barn sour horse is awful. They'll just want to run home all the time. So that was a big rule in our home. Even though this meadow was going homeward, I knew we had plenty of time to slow down. If I took my horse into a gentle gallop through it, we should be okay. Buffy was half quarter horse, half thoroughbred. And the thoroughbred side was racing blood. And every once in a while, that racing blood would bubble up, and we would experience a little bit of burst of speed. She felt that racing blood bubbling up at this point in time. She stretched her nose forth, she reached her legs out, and bam, we were gone. Now, I didn't let my passengers on the back know that I was out of control because, truthfully, I was really trying to show off for them anyway, and I thought it'd be kind of fun to scare them. And I knew I could get the horse back under control. I had plenty of time. It wasn't happening. This horse was in the zone, and it didn't matter how hard I pulled on that lead rope, she was not stopping. As we got closer and closer to home, I started getting a little bit more concerned. Because This is all national forest down there. I don't know if you can see this, but there's a road that goes down and the path that parallels that road. And we were on that path. And that path got thinner and thinner. It had ravines in it. It had trees. It had all of these things that you just would not want to run a horse through, especially with 3 people on it. Miraculously, we got through all of that. And we had to come through this little itty bitty gate here, or a cattle guard. Thank heavens she took the gate route. Just enough room for the horse to fit through the gate. And then we have this stretch of road right here. This is where I plan to get control. Because another rule that I learned very young was that if you reach, well, usually you have a bridle on, but since it was a halter, if you put the horse's nose in a different direction, the body will follow. So I reached and I brought my hand through that halter and I brought her face into my lap. The problem was Buffy didn't know this rule. She kept going straight even though her head was locked into my lap. And we were coming up here. About this time I suggested to Todd and Corey that they might want to bail off because I didn't know what was going to happen. I knew if my mom saw me running a horse home, she would kill me. And that was probably the most worrisome thing at the time. She wasn't straightening up, and this is a barbed wire fence here, and she wasn't whipping around, she was just going straight, and I knew that we were going to hit the fence if I didn't let her have her head. So I released the halter. She was trained to be a hunter jumper. She could clear a 4-foot barbed wire fence, nothing. So I got my knees locked on either side of her withers, brought myself up. By this time, I forgot completely about the passengers on their back. They were on their own. I interlocked my fingers into her mane, and I prepared for the jump, and she stopped. She straightened her front legs and sat on her butt and stopped. I already had the momentum of going forward, so I was projected into the air and flew head over feet and landed in the barbed wire fence, like a hammock on my back. Then I remembered I had 2 passengers. As I saw them flipping over, Todd landed on top of me, pressing the barbs into my back. And then here comes Corey, ripping those barbs down my back as we slid down the fence. I still have the scars on my back to prove it. Buffy stood up and trotted to her stall. She was just fine. More poignant, though, than the barbs in my back was the lesson that I learned that sometimes bridles are necessary. We are given laws, we're given rules, we're given commandments, we're given boundaries, we're given all these things to keep us safe. And I see that all of these people who suffer from diverse addictions that thought they were strong enough to handle it on their own. But they're not. We're not. We need the bridle. Thus I say, bring on the bridle. Thank you.